We found these photo albums from the 1920s in an old bank that's an antique store now. And in this video, we're going to figure out who they belong to so that we can tell her story. I was pretty shocked when I found out what happened to the lady who owned these photo albums. We're going to talk about Jane Elliot and a little bit about the man who rescued her grandson.
So stick around.
These albums were sitting in a glass case at Hilltop Antiques in Bell Buckle, Tennessee. We were retracing the footsteps of Ethel Nesbitt, the subject of our last video. She spent a lot of time in Bell Buckle, so we thought it would be fun to go down and check it out.
Bell Buckle is a town that is packed with antique stores. It's actually a pretty major part of their economy. People come from all over to visit shops, restaurants, boutiques, and festivals. And this one that we went to used to be a bank. And yes, you can go inside the vault. Above the vault is a framed original check from the early 1900s, which is pretty cool.
The photo albums are old and they're real soft, kind of leather bound. And the pages are a black paper. If you're familiar with old photo albums, then you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, and they tend to fall apart, so I didn't want to handle them any more than I really had to. The photos have several names and even locations and some dates, but even with all of those clues, it was still kind of tricky. Trying to figure out a photo album like this, I like to make a list of all the names, locations, and dates to try to make it all make sense. And in this one, we have Aunt Bill, Anna Joe, Chas, 3 months old, and Jane Elliot. Jane shows up the most, and the photos show her around 9 to 12 years old in the 1920s. So I did a quick search for Jane Elliot with a sibling, Anna Joe Elliot, born about 1915. And we get a pretty good hit in Sedalia, Missouri, 1936. Looking at the two pictures, it's kind of hard to say for sure, because it's really close. But this Jane in Missouri doesn't have any relatives matching the rest of the names from the photo album. And one location doesn't make sense. In the album, one of the pictures says Avondale Park. I couldn't find an Avondale Park in Missouri at all. But there's one in Birmingham.
If you like this video so far, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe. And be sure to check out our little merch shop for a t-shirt or a coffee mug. We appreciate all your support.
Another location in the photo album is the Confederate White House, which is now a museum. We decided to shift focus from the possible match in Missouri and try again with Birmingham as the location. When you're working on your own family research or helping somebody else with theirs, if something doesn't feel right, then stop and take 2 steps back and then take 1 little step forward in a different direction. It might save you a ton of time. Like years.
Jane Elliot was born Lula Jane Elliot in 1913 to John and Sally Elliot in Alabama and grew up around Birmingham. She was one of 7 kids. Her father worked in a coal mine in Jefferson County in 1920. Her father actually worked at the same mine as the kids in these photos from the Lewis Hine collection on the Library of Congress website. They worked at the Bessie mine for the Sloss Sheffield Steel and Iron Company.
And if you've seen any of our other videos, you've probably seen a few of the ones where we actually talk about Lewis Hine photos. He was the sociologist who was trying to expose child labor laws in the early 1900s. Well, it just so happens that he went down to the same coal mine as Jane's father. 1 year later in 1921, Jane's mother, Sally, passed away at only 38 years old. Her obituary says she was in an infirmary, but we couldn't find an official death certificate.
Here is a poem from Jane in 1924 we found on newspapers.com. She should have been about 11. Check this out. Skies of sapphire overhead, leaves of yellow, gold, and red. Russet earth, all parched and dry, rippling waters hastening by. Sweetly sing their goodbye song to summer that has come and gone. She must have been about 11 or 12 when she wrote this over 100 years ago.
In 1928, Jane's sister, Anna, Minnie Anna Elliot, now Kirkpatrick, gave birth to her first son, Charles. I'm going to go ahead and say this is probably Chas 3 months old. There are a few pictures in here of Jane wearing what looks to be a costume for a school play. In fact, there's a few pictures regarding school plays, and this comes in handy with our search on Ancestry, because when I searched for Jane Elliot, born around 1915 in Birmingham, Alabama, here is a senior photo that turns up. And this particular Jane Elliot is the president of the drama club. She's a little young as a senior at about 16 years old, but it's not super uncommon. Then, in 1930, she's still at home with her dad, who is still a coal miner, along with almost everyone else on the same street. Lula Jane married Marvin Leroy Chapman in 1934, who was a coal miner. In 1938, Lula Jane's dad passed away at 65 years old. I don't know what her dad was like, but it's worth noting that he was raising those kids alone after his wife died, through the Depression.
Jane and Roy had 3 kids. Roy's World War II draft card says that he was 5'6" and 130 pounds. And also, this is one more document showing that James' real first name was Lula.
Roy is a truck driver for a bottled gas company. I'm guessing it was probably propane or something. And 3 years later, Roy died on a work trip in California. His obituary says that he was on a 2-week work trip and died in his hotel, presumably from a heart attack. He was only 40 years old. The next thing we were able to find was Jane's obituary in 1972. The obituary doesn't say what happened to her, and honestly, this is usually the case, but I did one last newspaper search around her death date and found this. Afraid the gas would explode, he wanted to run but didn't. This is the headline of an article from July 3rd, 1972. And Alicia is going to read it out loud for you.
Joe Knott is waiting for his reward for saving the life of a little boy and 2 other people trapped in a burning car last Sunday afternoon. He doesn't want money, though, or even thanks. He already turned down the cash when the boy's father called. Only reluctantly did he accept the thanks. Knott, 42, of 800 Cochise Trail, told the father of Philip Hutto, 13, who is in fair condition at Baptist Medical Center, Montclair, that the only thing he wants is to let me see him again when he gets out of the hospital. The father promised it would be done. Knott insists he just did what anyone else would have done. He had some help from one of the other bystanders, but he never found out who the man was. This is what happened. 2 cars had collided on US 78 last Sunday afternoon, about 3 miles east of Jasper. 3 persons were trapped in one of the cars, and it was on fire when Knott pulled his car to the side of the road to investigate. Knott, who was returning to Birmingham from a fishing trip at Smith Lake, said he could see the people in the burning car and heard them moaning. I've been to Smith Lake.
Have you really?
I have. I ran to the car and pulled at the front and back doors, but they were jammed. The doors on the other side had been caved in by the accident. Knott tugged at the doors time and again. They wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, flames were flicking at the sides of the auto from beneath the back wheels near the gas tank. I was crying because I couldn't get the doors open, Knott said. I was thinking about the gas tank exploding and I got scared. For about 10 seconds there, at the toss of a coin, I might have run away down the road. But he didn't. Instead, he went back to the front door, put his fingers as far as he could under the door edge, braced his foot against the car, and heaved. The door opened a crack, started creaking, and then burst open. Despite the intense heat, Knott went to work. He first carried out an unidentified man, then went back for Mrs. Lula Jane Chapman, 60, of Birmingham. When he went back the second time, he heard Philip yelling for his grandmother. "Where's my nanny? Where's my nanny?" Looking over the back seat, he saw the boy lying on the floor. His arm was broken. 5 minutes after he had gotten the three out, the gas tank exploded. Knott drove to Community Hospital in Jasper, where he was treated and released. The unidentified man in the car was treated at People's Hospital in Jasper and released. Mrs. Lula Jane Chapman died from her injuries suffered, as did two persons in the other car, Frank Manasco, 57, of Sipsey, and Lois Manasco, 66, of Jasper. As for Knott, he doesn't see anything extraordinary about what he did. In fact, he called himself a coward for thinking about turning and running in fear of the gas tank exploding. But he didn't, and that is the difference between a coward and a hero. Joe Knott, ladies and gentlemen.
Man, way to go, Joe. What would you do in that situation? I guess try. That's all you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was pretty wild. And naturally, I had to figure out what happened to Joe. He won the Responsible Citizen of the Year award for Birmingham, and his obituary on Find a Grave is pretty nice. It reads, Joseph Ray Knott, age 89, of Jasper, Alabama, passed away peacefully December 28, 2018. He is preceded in death by his parents, Claude Allen and Mattie Bell Knott, and his son, Joseph Earl Knott. He was raised in Empire, Alabama, in the mining camp. He began his career in the dairy industry at White Dairy. Joseph later took a position with Barber Ice Cream, from which he retired after 44 years of service as the vice president and general manager. Upon retirement from the dairy industry, Joseph began selling cars at several dealerships in Jasper. He had a great passion for bass fishing, especially on Smith Lake. Joseph designed fleck worm jigs and spinnerbait. His Weed Wader spinnerbait was a great success and won fishing tournaments in Gunnersville, Alabama for 2 consecutive years in a row. Joseph was a loving husband, father, and grandfather. He was a good provider and loved his family deeply. He was deeply respected and will be missed by all who knew him.
I've been to Smith Lake before, and it's very nice. I would 100% fish there if I fished.
Well, I think we know where you can get some spinner baits. Get some Joe Knott certified spinner baits.
Do you know where we could get those?
Not yet.
I bet you would be the one to figure it out, though.
We can find them. If they're out there, we'll see if we can find them.
Mm-hmm.
Jane is buried at Cedar Grove Cemetery in Leeds, Alabama. Her daughter Sue, Philip's mom, died in Smyrna, Tennessee, which is in Rutherford County, not too far from where these albums were found. Okay, future James here with a bit of a twist. I kind of had to take my own advice with this one. When you're working on your own family research or helping somebody else with theirs, if something doesn't feel right, then stop and take 2 steps back and then take 1 little step forward in a different direction. Because while I was editing the video, a few things were really gnawing at me, such as this picture. It says Mother 1924. This was bothering me because I had found that Lula Jane's mom died in 1921. So 24 was a little off. And sometimes dates can be wrong, but this one was a little hard to ignore. Also, Jane and Anne look very close in age, but the census records show that they are about 5 to 6 years apart. This was also bugging me. And this picture of Uncle Terrence, Aunt Bill, and Aunt Joe. Lula Jane's older sister is Minnie Ann, and her grandmother's name is Willie, who was still alive in the 1920s, but there was no evidence of a Terrence anywhere. So making this make sense was getting kind of hard. One other small issue that was a bit of a red flag is the fact that Lula Jane had 6 siblings, but there's no pictures of them anywhere in either one of these albums, other than maybe Ann Joe, if that was her sister. But Aunt Joe is in this picture with Aunt Bill and Uncle Terrence, so that leads me to believe that Anne and Jane were cousins, not siblings. It just wasn't enough, so I had to take another look, and I'm really glad we did. The girl in these photos is not Lula Jane Elliot. It's actually Jane Elliot Lampkin, who was born in 1917, also in Birmingham. But honestly, at the point of production in this video, I couldn't just bring myself to delete the heroic story of Joe Knott, or the tale of Lula Jane Elliot and her coal miner father. I felt that those stories needed to be told because, honestly, the whole point of this channel is to tell the story of folks who might be forgotten and don't have anybody else to tell their stories. So why not? But also, I wanted to leave all of this in because this is a perfect example to check, double check, and check again your research when doing your own family history. Now, let's get into the real Jane E. I had to stop looking for Jane Elliot because I wasn't getting very far. But one picture had Terrence, Aunt Will, and Aunt Joe on it. That's quite a bit to go on. And like in all of my other videos, if you've got that many relatives in one spot with a location, you should be okay to figure out who it is. Using Avondale Park as a location, we can search this and quickly find Terrence Ryan with his wife Willie and daughter Ann. Now the question is, at this point, does little Ann have a cousin named Jane? Short answer, yes. Uncle Terrence had a sister, Irene, who married Charles Lampkin in Birmingham 1915. They had one daughter 2 years later. And can you guess what her name was? Jane Elliot. So Elliot was not her last name, it was her middle name. Jane Elliot was an only child. As pointed out, she has several photos of herself and Anne in costumes for school plays. Her father, Charles, was a bookkeeper at the Central Ice Company. He became a self-employed accountant for a while before working as the primary tax clerk for the county in Birmingham. Jane's mom, Irene, lived as a homemaker. Jane went to college at Samford University and graduated in 1938. Now, an important detail to mention here is that Samford didn't get its name until 1965. Before that, it was called Howard College. She said she wanted to become an English teacher. And according to a very thorough news article in 1955, she was a substitute school teacher for a year before entering government work in Washington, D.C. She was also a volunteer nurse at the Red Cross for most of her life. And here's an article where she talks about leaving her job during the day and going to the hospital to help during a major nurse shortage. And in 1955, the Birmingham News did a story about her, with a headline that I don't think would fly these days. Pretty Jane Lampkin has brains, handles money. Written by Miriam Hill. I'm going to read this one out loud to you because this one tells you most everything you would ever want to know about Jane Elliot. The Birmingham Ordnance District, one of 14 ordnance districts in the country, can boast at least one distinction. Its fiscal officer is a woman. Pretty Jane Lampkin, whose sparkling smile in itself is a valuable government property, is officially known as Chief of the Budget and Fiscal Branch. She holds the purse strings for a busy staff of 254 men and women and an office that presently is administering ordnance material contracts totaling $265 million. Miss Lampkin passed a civil service examination and went to work for the federal government 15 years ago. Her first assignment landed her in Washington, D.C. in the Civilian Personnel Division of the Office of the Secretary of War. 5 months in Washington was enough, so she managed to transfer to the Birmingham Ordnance District. Starting as a clerk typist, she was made supervisor of the property branch during the war and was promoted to branch chief, with 15 persons in her department 3 years ago. Quoting, "When I first came to work here," Ms. Lampkin says, "there were only 12 persons on staff. During the war years, personnel jumped to more than 700, while the civilian peak in 1953 was 582. This office, Ms. Lampkin explains, handles all contracts for ordnance material in the states of Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. My job is to administer the fiscal provisions of the contracts. I am responsible for certifying the availability of funds. Ms. Lampkin also serves as an alternate member of the Award Board and Settlement Review Board, which involves the approving and awarding of contracts and determining the availability of funds. A graduate of Woodlawn High School and Howard College, later named Sanford, Ms. Lampkin did substitute school teaching for a year before entering government work. Being a chief 8 hours a day has never diminished her interest in a number of extracurricular activities. She has studied voice the last 8 years and is soprano soloist at Second Presbyterian Church. Her church membership is at East Lake Methodist. Miss Lampkin recently joined the Women's Civic Chorus, which practices every Monday night. Previously, her Monday nights were devoted to a hobby night at the YWCA, where she took lessons in square dancing. The busy career girl is a member of the Downtown Music Club and is vice president of Alpha Iota Business Sorority. Every Wednesday night, she serves as a volunteer Red Cross's nurse aide at the local Veterans Hospital. An only child, Ms. Lampkin lives with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Charles E. Lampkin, 8304 First Avenue South. Her favorite playmate is a Spitz named Mikey. Jane never married and never had kids. She was a very serious career woman who had a lot of important lines of work. For a lot of people, their work and accomplishments are their legacy. And this is something that's always fascinated me. People who don't have kids, who pour themselves into work to leave behind something to be remembered by. And for Jane, we're able to know a lot about her. Jane died in 1991 and is buried with her parents in Lot 30 of the Forest Hill Cemetery in Alabama. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's still a few people around who remember her. It seems like she made a lasting impression on her little chunk of the world.